Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. You have entered McGregor 113, our very favorite, tried and true stadium classroom / speaking engagement room. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for coming here to campus and being in Ohio. Thank you for being part of our wonderful Antioch community. My name is Brooke Bryan. I'm a recently departed associate professor of writing and aesthetics. I am here to facilitate a panel on John Ronsheim and the aesthetics of food, and we have 3 speakers. We've decided to organize ourselves into 10-minute presentations. We might fudge a little and go to, 11 and a half minutes each. But that allows us to have about a half an hour of discussion, because I think that this discussion is going to be fire. And also, in true Antioch tradition, we have an experiential component. This panel ends at 4 p.m., and at 4:15, on the other side of campus, we are going to have a wine tasting hosted by yours truly, your panelists. So. Without further ado, I will invite David up as our first panelist. Thank you, David.
Okay. Grade for my closeness to the mic and audibility. Okay? Okay. Tutti bene. Great. Let's do it. So, the Antioch Culinary Arts Program. So, as Brooke said, I'm David Ramm. I'm a 1991 graduate of the college, and I'm like ridiculously excited to talk to y'all about the Antioch Culinary Program. It's honestly a little embarrassing, and I think it's worth saying that I'm a graduate of 1991, and I had nothing to do with the Antioch Culinary Program. When I was at Antioch, I studied, I always say I studied cultural history, which is a way of saying I took history classes, but I took a lot of classes with John Ronsheim. And about music and wine. And this is John Ronsheim, who was giving in this photo, giving a olive oil tasting. I don't, so those of you who are under, say, 40 will not appreciate the following fact, but I can guarantee that there were not 12 different types of olive oil available in southwestern Ohio in 1986 or so when this was taken. These were bottles obtained through a great deal of effort and real thought. And that was characteristic of John and his teaching. We'll hear more about that, I think, from Jeff and Rick. I don't have time to go into it. But I do want to talk about this culinary program and kind of where it comes from. And I think this quote is the best one that I could find that kind of sums up the position, which is America has taken food for granted long enough, and the cooks have finally begun to move away from the servants' quarters. Let us take everyone out of the kitchen, and then anyone can go into it. I have quibbles with the use of the apostrophe there, but I'm going to blow past those and just focus on the last part. Let us take everyone out of the kitchen, and then anyone can go into it. And I keep John spoke really metaphorically often, and I think that what he's talking about here is changing the way we value the kitchen, taking it from this place of devalued labor and really elevating it, seeing the people who are in there making things are connecting all kinds of things at once. They're connecting the environment, they're connecting art, they're connecting all of this, synthesizing at that moment. So the goal was really to elevate that labor while making it honestly for everyone. And I think that I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment, but I want to focus on this idea that anyone can go into it. And that's also part of the mission of Antioch as an educational institution. John was not somebody who grew up in he grew up in Cadiz, Ohio, tiny little town, very normal American food, and it was only later that he kind of matured in his taste through the senses, and he knew that this was something that could change, and anyone could do that. That was the vision in any case. So also, I will just pause parenthetically and say that I went through like 75 different versions of this, as Brooke can attest, who's kind of watched my slides change over and over, and included a red version where I read it out loud, and I don't have my notes, so you're really getting the like, as I remember it version, which is probably the best one. So the Antioch Culinary Program came to John in 1973 on this chorus tour that you're going to hear about, one of them that you'll hear about. And he conceived of it, he said, in Florence, in San Marco, watching the Annunciation by Piero della Francesca. There are actually confusingly, there are two Annunciations by Piero della Francesca in San Marco, but I'm just going with this one. It's kind of a confusing bit of inspiration for a culinary program. Gabriel's not bringing a limoncello or anything, right? This is just this moment. But I think, I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It inspires all kinds of things. But I think I want to connect it a little bit to the overall vision. So on the left is the fresco you just saw, and on the right is a composition by John Ronsheim called Love. It's based on a George Herbert. It's not based on. It is a setting of the George Herbert poem Love. Typically, if you want to look it up, it's given as Love 3, because there are multiple poems with that name. That connection between these two is, I think, meant a couple of different things. Florence is where John kind of came to, I feel like, relate to wine and food in this deeper way, in a daily way of beautiful things where you could cultivate the senses. He studied there for 3 years with a composer named Luigi Dalla Piccola. And so it was sort of like a homecoming to be back, I think, at a certain level. But it's also that I think just visually there are a lot of connections between this, and then confuse it. In one of the versions of this presentation, I then showed you the 14th century manuscript that the Love score of John's is based on. I'll spare you that, but I think the point is the visual echoes of those chambers and that hard horizontal line. I really think that it's tied up with that and with visually that resonance, but the most important part is that Love is a poem that's set as if like a normal sinning soul. Like it's a 17th century poem. I'm the most atheistic person you'll ever meet in your life. I'm just talking in terms of the view of the positions of the soul speaking to the Lord, to God, as a guest. And the last line is about God saying, "You're going to sit down." What is it? Taste my meat, so I did sit and eat. Right? It's that is the kind of embodiment of love in this context, is that communal moment. It's that sort of love, that sort of connection and rapture around food and as a communal way. And that's really genuinely important because as John conceived of this was intended to be this international thing. I just love this as like the perfect balance between org chart and conspiracy theory. You've got the Antioch and very much the college. Yellow Springs is the center. This is a time when we were still connected to what I can barely pronounce the word university. But anyway, so it's under the college. And you'll see that big node there, but then it branches off and it's connected to the Antioch farm in the upper left, which is kind of the biggest thing. And the whole idea here was that he wanted to revolutionize kind of everything about locally, starting first in Yellow Springs, the way that food was grown and consumed, And most importantly, in a way, how it was given out to the people. So they were going to be, if you were in this program, you were going to cook in the calf, and you were going to help serve, and you were going to be part of this world. And all the existing union members were going to be, the idea was that they would be given free tuition to join this if they wanted. Nobody was going to be deprived of a job. That was not the goal, but to potentially bring even more people into it and harmonize along those lines, but especially to find out through the Antioch farm what grows here, what's right. This is an international, though, at the same time, because there was this French component. You would go to France for a year according to the overall structure, and you would take language classes and learn French techniques. There was also the possibility of going to California to study winemaking, enology, and the ultimate vision was then also someplace in Italy to grow wine there, olive oil, all these options, and to elevate, in a human sense, elevate the day-to-day cooking in Antioch, focused on local, with the idea that everyone who would leave would then spread that aesthetic everywhere. I left out the most important part. This is 1978 when this is proposed. He had this vision in 73, he had one in 75, and it was really a very different moment in thinking about these things. And this locality and the focus on that is quite, like I'll illustrate the different way that food is thought about then, later. And it's worth saying that the program, it was initially proposed under Jim Dixon in 73. He liked it, but then it got vetoed by a dean. Then, after John proposed it again in 78, it passed in 79 faculty, and it had a whole beautiful structure that I won't go into, except to say that, as you know, this beautiful structure never got realized. And I think one thing that you might think as part of that is that maybe it was just a pie in the sky thing and there wasn't enough kind of practical thought. I think that's reasonable, right? It sounds very fanciful, it sounds utopian. But one of the things that John did from the get-go was seek out experts, he knew he was an amateur in the positive sense, on these things, and get two things: their input on what would really work, what would make this program vital and effective, and two, what do you're a well-known person, get me money. Basically, it was a time, I'm sure all of you will be shocked, the college was not doing well financially, okay? And it needed money, and this was partially a very practical solution for that. You've got a new way of presenting a thing where there's a very strong public interest, new students, a new approach, and here's both a practical source of funds in the terms of students coming in and this fundraising model. And one of the people that he brought in to do that was Julia Child. If there was somebody more famous in America in the late 70s and early 80s for food than Julia Child, I don't know who that was. I mean, maybe Orson Welles for the odious Gallo ad. Was it Almaden?
I think so.
Oh, no, Gallo.
Gallo.
I'll stand by that one. I'll lose a lot of arguments with that one. But so he assembled this board, and I don't have time to read all these names, but I'm still gonna do it. Peg Bracken, if those of you who don't know, who's just an amazing Antioch alum, hilarious from this totally other view. John Cage, whom we talked about, right? This was an art that Julia Child, Craig Claiborne, Marion Cunningham, the Fanny Farmer cook, if anyone knows, Elizabeth David, but MFK Fisher. And anybody who knows anything about MFK Fisher knew that she did not mess around with things. And there are actually letters in Antiochiana where you can see her tapping her fingers on the board saying, like, things have to happen and things have to be different. She was a very critical figure. All kinds, Richard Olney, Alice Waters, all kinds of figures, and a really nice task force to go with it. But one of the problems was that Antioch viewed, as people did, the idea of finer food through this sort of lens. This is gourmet 6 months worth of gourmet magazine covers. You have to search to find food on this. It includes fox hunting. I mean, is there anything like more merely grotesquely assertive of lifestyle stuff than fox hunting across all of humankind? And literally exclusive, like the photos are, these gates, keeping people out, right? So there was a strong reaction against it from that point of view. There was a strong reaction from faculty that said, we don't have any money. I don't care if you get money. You're going to disrupt the kind of balance of the faculty by doing this, just by bringing in these other elements. But most of all, I think we're a liberal arts college, not a vocational school. And I think that's it's a misunderstanding of the Antioch model and what the vision was, but that's just the truth. But I think the one that most frankly irritates me, I hear you, is that a very common comment that you can see was, you can't do that in a small town in Ohio. And my response when I first heard about this in the 80s and now is still, you can't do it in a small town in Ohio because you haven't tried and you give up before you started. And I think that that's the real problem with that. I'm going to just end on this image of John at a tasting. And I want to focus on this idea, not only will our graduates find excellent paying jobs, influence our poor food habits, but perhaps someday form community farm restaurants. Like, notice those hyphens in 1978 throughout America, places where all the food to be eaten can come from the land surrounding that place of consuming. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And one thing I think, so there's the prescience of this like farm to table idea, right? In farm to restaurant, we all know what table means. It's not your own table, it's a restaurant table. But the thing that I love about it most is that it puts community first, right? And I think that's honestly missing about everything that's happened since. And I think that that's like the core beauty of the vision. If I had my notes, I'd remember all the people I have to thank, but also J.D. Wood for these great photos, and now Jeff Treistman.
That's okay. Okay, does everybody hear me? My name's Jeff Treistman, not Treistman. It's okay, you're excused. Everybody does it. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about it. And I'm a graduate of 76. I'm a 76 graduate. And I first met John in 1973. I was, the guy across the hall from me, my first year of college, was Don Giller, who compiled a lot of stuff about John. He's writing an autobiography, and he's the one that told me, you got to take a class. He knew I was interested in music, and he said, oh, you got to take a class with John. So I went to the first class, and at that time you could go and kind of test a class, just go in and see what it was like, and you didn't have to sign up at that time. But I went in, and for an hour, I was sitting there laughing, not out loud, disruptively, but for philosophical reasons. Everything he was saying resonated with me, but he pulled things together in such an unusual, amusing way. And one of the things that doesn't get mentioned about John enough was he was very funny. He was extremely funny. He had a great sense of humor. He loved Buster Keaton. So I'm going to start with Buster Keaton because I'm going to go through a whole list of things, his interests. Okay, because when you took a class from John Ronsheim, you thought you were taking a music class. But what you were taking was a philosophy class, a psychology class, a literature class, and cultural criticism class, all rolled together. And that idea of combining all those things really was an expression of what you could call, and I don't really like this term, but I'm going to use it anyway because it is an easy way to convey it. He was like a Renaissance man. And it wasn't just because he was teaching Renaissance music. He had that kind of approach to learning where he wanted to learn, everything reinforced everything, and he believed in sort of a unity of human effort. And that that expression, that Renaissance thing is kind of what fed, the rest of these programs and other things. So in 75, so John did 2 chorus trips. So he was already experienced bringing unusual, very popular programs to Seattle. He brought Cecil Taylor for 2 years, was a guest professor with 2 other musicians, and then he did these chorus tours. He did one in 73, and he did another one in 75, and that's kind of when that germination of the culinary program started for those chorus trips. So that what we were doing was just classic experiential education. We were going to the places that we were studying. We were going to the art museums. We had an art history professor who was talking about the art. We went to an institute in Tours, which was an Institut Gastronomique, and we got lessons on perception, on how you taste and smell things, how you interact with wine. And I'm going to say something else about that. But then we were also singing, right? We were in these incredible cathedrals, like all of the great Gothic cathedrals. We sang in them. Sometimes we were even singing Mass, which was really he had to get exceptions to be able to sing Mass in Catholic churches, which is kind of interesting because they didn't because the Masses were in Latin. They weren't in vernacular, and you had to do things in the vernacular. Let's see. So after, when I graduated, then, so I graduated in 76. In 1979, I got a job in a restaurant in Seattle. I'd have to say it was the best restaurant within 800 miles. Okay, it was kind of somewhat modeled on Alice Waters. In other words, it was doing farm to table, and it wasn't doing classic French cuisine, it was doing nouvelle cuisine, but we learned a lot of classic techniques. So I started out as a dishwasher in 1979. I ended up as a sauté cook, which meant I learned all of the stations of the restaurant. And after that, based on the fact that I had this incredible skill set with wine, I was able to get a job with a wine importer. Also, I spoke Italian, which helped because this was an Italian wine importer in Seattle. And so I worked with him for 5 years. I worked at that wine importer for 5 years. And after that, my wife, Polly, who was also on the chorus tour, unfortunately she wasn't able to come today for this reunion. She would have loved to be here because she was also loved John. We opened a wine shop, and we ran that for 9 years. And while we had about 7 years in, we opened a wine bar. Okay, and they overlapped for 2 years, and the wine bar we ran for 7 years, and then I bailed out of the business after 23 years of being in the business and became a teacher of all things, became a school librarian. Anyway. John's daughter, Phoebe, moved to Seattle, and John started visiting. So he would come and hang out in the wine shop and annoy customers sometimes. Usually he was his entertaining self, but he could be a little manic and obsessive seeming to some people who didn't know him. And so I really had a continuous relationship from him from 73 to the end of his life. We had a lot of correspondence. While he was formulating this program and trying to sell it at the college was when I was starting to work in restaurant industry, so we were just kind of conversing about that. quite a bit. So that's my history with John. Now I want to talk a little bit more about his basic approach. And I said he taught philosophy, and by that I mean he was really into phenomenology. He referenced Husserl quite frequently in his lectures. And phenomenology is all about consciousness and the way you perceive. It's about perception. And John's idea was that you can learn how to perceive and you can get better at it, okay? And that way you open yourself up to experiences that would be, it's not experiences, would open you up to the possibility of being able to differentiate between different qualities of things. So if you develop your senses and you become more capable of perceiving the difference between a hothouse tomato and a naturally grown tomato, it's huge, right? Some people don't pay any attention. And so that idea of really focusing on the senses and using that as like your gateway to a consciousness about things, that kind of played into his goal. The other thing I wanted to say specifically about why Ohio? Well, John was from Ohio. He was from a small town in Ohio. He loved small town Ohio. Even though he lived in Europe for, 7 or 8 years, he came back. And he thought that this program had to be here because of the richness, and I'm going to use his pronunciation, and all the chorus people, he said, the Searle, people, it's the Searle. He had kind of a little bit of a speech impediment. It added to the eccentricity of his presentation. Yeah, what else do I want to say? Let me think. Yep. I think that's it at this point. I'll wait for questions. How's that? Thank you.
So my name's Rick Jones. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
But now you have to.
Okay, so now I got to talk into the microphone. So I was telling Brooke, I suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome because I only spent 2 academic quarters at Antioch and 2 co-ops. But they were very impactful to my life because they gave me my life's work. And my first quarter at Antioch was spent in Europe with the 1975 chorus trip. And it was everything that Jeff just said and more. And it gave me the idea that I could become a winemaker, that I could, and that's what I've done for the last 40 years, is I've made my career in wine production and winemaking. So I'll just start with this. When John died and we had the memorial service for him at the Glen, okay, so I get choked up at times. And, people stood up in the great American tradition of telling nice things about people after they're gone and they can't hear them, which I don't know why we do it that way, but people stood up and said about the impact that John had on their life, and what I shared was my discovery of differential calculus, which is, and I got to tell myself, because when I tell this story, I do get choked up, and there's no crying in calculus, but, so the story behind that is, he gave me the idea that that a winemaker is something you could do and become, and I had 2 big obstacles in my way. And I'll talk about the differential calculus part later, but the first one was I knew that winemaking was agriculture, and I knew that agriculture was certainly then and still is today a largely male, macho-dominated industry, and that a lot of people had all the isms you could imagine, And I didn't know whether I could operate in that kind of environment or whether I could even enjoy it at all. And but Antioch had a solution for me. My first co-op was working for the Green Giant Company, driving a pea combine in Dayton, Washington, of all places. And believe me, it was just as macho and as redneck as you might imagine. I had one crew leader just take one look at me and said, "He's not working on my crew." But I found that I could operate in that environment, and we worked. It also gave me my first experience in agriculture. We worked 28 12-hour days without a break off, with no overtime, by the way, which most agricultural workers do not get overtime. And I found out, so it kind of handled that part of it for me, the fear that I was just, yes, I was going to stand out, but I could still operate and deal with that. The other problem I had was I had virtually no scientific education, and I was a technophobe, a science. Just the idea of calculus, just the word, frightened me. Not the least of which is they often refer to it as the calculus, which makes it even more. And so, sorry. So, unfortunately, Antioch wasn't going to provide me a winemaking education very efficiently. So I left after a year, moved to California, and started out with really like high school algebra and basic chemistry. And I found out I particularly liked chemistry. And I had wonderful teachers at City College in San Francisco. I had developed some skills as a nursing assistant, so I worked in hospitals at night. I went to school during the day, and but I still had to take calculus. And I knew in order to get into Davis, so I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in enology from Davis. I've had a 40-year career. I've made wine on 4 continents. I also made olive oil for a while. I've had really a great, varied career. But I had to take calculus. And so now this is the point at which I'm going to lose half the audience, and the other half is going to go, "That's the dumbest explanation I've ever heard for a differential." But I was sitting in a classroom at San Francisco State where I could do a semester's worth of calculus in about 6 weeks. It was very concentrated. I was terrified. And they talked about, the problem of how do you tell what an instantaneous velocity is, for instance. When you drop a ball from the ceiling, it's always accelerating. How do you tell what the instantaneous velocity is? And this guy explained that the way they did that was they started from what they knew, which was geometry. So they would say, okay, from a little bit of a time, if we just assume it's linear in this little space, and we calculate the effects of that, and then we shrink the time interval to smaller and smaller, we begin to notice that a value emerges. You never get there, but you get as close as you need to get. If I tell you you're going to go from here to the back of the wall, half the distance at a time, there'll be a time where your nose is practically against the wall. And I just remember, this was really a peak experience in my life, a kind of aesthetic joy that I can still access. And I just remember thinking, human beings are amazing. That they would start with something they know and then ask the question about how you apply that to seemingly something you don't understand, and to have this arrive. So that was why I talked about differential calculus with John, and I'll come back a little bit about that. So so basically, I learned the science, and I enjoyed the science, and I worked for two wineries for about 10 years. I worked for a large industrial winery. I worked for a small boutique winery that was an estate. And then about 30 years ago, a partner and I, from somebody I knew from college, invented a specific type of wine filtration that takes care of a problem that has existed in wine for 2,000 years. And that process is now used anywhere they make wine, all over the world. And
Rich?
what?
Are you rich?
Rich enough, you know.
Saved the college?
Yeah, not quite that rich, but we can talk about that. It's actually been a great week to be back in this back in this environment. So, anyways, from that I kind of became. Most of my last 30 years have been working on the technical side of wine, and most of the innovations in winemaking techniques are invented in Europe. And the reason why that is that the industry over there, the business over there, is really important in France, Italy, and Germany in particular. And so the governments fund the research. And so mostly what I've done for the last 30 years is work with suppliers and institutions in Europe and winemakers in the United States to bring them together to, to teach the winemakers how to apply these techniques if they want to get certain styles in their wine. And then I'll just close with this, which is, I was thinking about it today, and if I convey information to you, that's a certain kind of education. But if I convey education to you in a way that you can learn things that you don't even know, that is powerful education. And John Ronsheim taught me things that he didn't even know. He gave me a place to stand, and I'm deeply grateful for the life I've had and for my knowledge of science. And it wouldn't have come about, and I'm sure John didn't know very much about science and chemistry, but it wouldn't have come about without my encounter with him and with Antioch College, and the ability to operate in a I used to have my first boss in the winery I worked in was a young, wasn't too much older than I was. He was the president of a winery he was a young Japanese American man. He hadn't been in the camps, but his parents had been in the internment camps. He grew up on a ranch in Madera County. And I remember one time talking to him about some recalcitrant grower we had who was giving us a problem. And he said to me, "Don't worry, Rick, I have a PhD in redneck." And so I'll just leave it with that real education is giving somebody a place to stand so that they can learn themselves. And I'll just leave it at that.
Hell yeah.
And so we have the Antioch faculty member ahead of his time, phenomenologies of taste, a proposal, potential other ways the college might have went. We have new food industries and making the bourgeois food culture back, reclaiming it back to the everyday, and how good teachers light you up, light your mind up, and send you places that neither they nor you knew where you were going. Thank you all. Very amazing. I'm going to take a stack. Who do I have for questions, comments? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh, good.
You'll 6.
I'm Jay Rothman, son of Philip Rothman. I'm Jay Rothman, son of Philip Rothman, who some of you may remember. In 1975, when I was still a high school student in Yellow Springs High School, I took John's class on music appreciation. I have just finished a memoir that took me 50 years to write. I started it in 1976. John gave it its title. It's called From Home to Home. And in that class that I audited, John talked about Bach. And he said, Bach, the journey of Bach is a journey of home to home. And those of you who took his classes, you can imagine how he was all over the room teaching us this Bach Sonata number 1. And he just said, when it leaves home, it's in search of itself, but it's lost. And it's going off there looking for home. It found it. Oh no, it lost it. And he would keep going. And so that's how I've organized my book, From Home to Home. And in 1975, I joined you, Rick. I think you don't know it, but I was the guy with a red backpack traveling in Europe, and I came and met you guys in Florence, and one of you decided that I didn't belong. And John argued with him and saying, sure he does. He's a nice guy, and he took my class, and sure he does. And the guy in the choir said, no, he's an interloper, and he should leave. And it was a nice Antioch conundrum, belonging, not belonging, but that also, of course, went into my book. What is home, and do we belong, and how do we find home, and how do we search it? So John's inspiration completely has organized my life and direction. Last week I had my 50th high school reunion, and Phoebe was there. We were in high school together. And I had her read the section where I talked about John teaching me about Bach and teaching me about life. And she said, yes, you got that.
Karen.
Hi, I'm Catherine, 72. So the name of that course was The Phenomenology of Musical Perception, which I also got to take. And home was a big central figure. But my question is, I mean, I'm so thrilled that you're talking about this. I met John in the Glen one day, and for about 2 hours, he told me the whole story. And it was thrilling then, and I'm so disappointed that the college couldn't find the capacity to do this. Can we figure this out now? Is there a way? We've got the farm. We've got people that know the story. Are there ways that we can incorporate some of this into the reality of a future college?
Yeah, I wanted to respond a little bit about that because there's a lot of talk about student engagement and listening to the students. And this was something that John was the best at. And it was, I'll tell a very short anecdote. Presidents doesn't exist anymore, but I lived in Presidents, and the music building was kind of just across the street. And one time after class, I was hanging out after class. A lot of us hung out after class, and finally I was the last one in the class. Everybody else had left, and John said, "Let me give you a ride home." And I said, "John, I live across the street." He said, "Doesn't matter. I'm going to give you a ride home." So I got in his car, and we sat there for another hour talking. Right? And that was that quality. That's, to me, that's precious, and that's what's precious about Antioch, is those type of relationships. And it looks like that type of relationship is still happening at this school. So that's a positive I'm going to leave us with there.
I had who was number 3? Three and 4. Sorry, I lost our stack. You're 4. Joan is 4. Then you can be 5. You're 5.
Hi, I'm Sherry Roberts. I graduated in 1978, but I stuck around a year, like a lot of students would do, and I continued to take classes as well as a class with John during that time. I was on the 1975 chorus trip with Jeff and Rick and a number of other people in this room. And I just want to expand upon the fact that that trip, I think, had an immeasurable impact on everyone that went on it, both years, I would say, even if we didn't go into the food industry. And it had such an impact that this last fall, about 15 of us, plus spouses, made a trip back to a small town in Italy called Lamora in the Piemonte region, where we had a particularly memorable meal with John, with truffles and any number of Italian delights. And I worked for 2 years organizing this tour with the help of some very dedicated other chorus members, including Roger Stigliano, who was there, Laurie White, Shannon Edwards, peripherally Suzanne Johnson, who was our representative from the 73 chorus, and Jeff and Polly, his wife. And when we got there to Lamora, we were met by the mayor, by a town historian who had been at our meal, who created a whole brochure for us, a 50-year anniversary visit back to the town of Lamora. And we realized at that time that John's, and we found out so much more about the intricacies of how John organized that tour and even got us to the small town of Lamora, which we never even knew the background of. And we realized that this moment in our lives not only touched us, but touched the people of this small village of Lamora. And if anybody wants to find out more about our tour, I wrote for the Antiochian a full article about the background, about how the tour is developed, and then we had a 3-day group experience. I wrote about the first day. Polly, Jeff's wife, wrote about the second day, and Roger wrote about the third day, and you can look that up on the Antiochian, the last issue. And the only other thing I want to add is that this idea of John's, I'm so glad that you're bringing this to the fore, and your detailed information about it is really revelatory. I love it. And I think it was probably around 79, my last year here, that John started talking about this. And I moved to California afterwards. I moved to San Francisco, where I've been ever since. It's the fulcrum of the food farm to table, Alice Waters, restaurants, Jeremiah Tower, everything. And I was watching in the ensuing years how this idea of John's was evolving and taking place immediately around me, and just like for so many years was frustrated at the lost opportunity that Antioch had. The fact that John envisioned this flat field that we called the golf course, turning it into an organic garden, that at least finally happened. But, I always thought, what if he had been taken seriously? So at the very least, I'm glad this is all being acknowledged and is for his vision, because he was a visionary, even if he wasn't the most practical visionary. But it was a phenomenal vision, and he was absolutely ahead of his time.
We'll pass to Joan, and then to, what's your name? Carla.
I'm Joan Stromanis, class of 1957, and I never knew John Ronsheim, and I certainly wish I had. But therefore my comments will be more general. First of all, I want to talk about the phenomenon of retiring from cooking. And this is a phenomenon I see in my circle all the time. These are people who are living alone, mostly widowed, and they don't cook anymore, and they brag about it. I no longer cook. I no longer have to. Now, that's not true of me. I cook, and I'm worth it. But I think that it's really important for people to see cooking as a daily joy, as a daily artistic and aesthetic activity. I try to persuade people of this. Maybe you can do better. But anyway, I see people. I even know somebody who wrote a book called The Kitchen is Closed. So that's a phenomenon that I deplore. I have a question. I am concerned about all we have learned, especially recently, about the dangers of alcohol. And the fact that there is no amount of alcohol that's good for you. Even though we used to be told that wine was good for us, it turns out not to be true. And I myself have difficulty managing wine. It does bad things for me. So I'm just wondering, to what extent is the wine industry paying attention to this, and what are the responses?
That's definitely
Thank you. I guess to answer that question. So the question about health impacts on alcohol. The question about wine impacts on health, alcohol on health. Of course, the alcohol industry writ large is trying to fight against that. I do think I'm going to push back a little bit on the idea that no amount of alcohol is good for you. That I think, technically that's true, but the fact of the matter is that moderate amounts of alcohol taken with food are perfectly safe for most people. Problem, of course, is alcohol is an addictive substance, and I think it's important. In my business, we've seen, we've had this enormous growth in the wine industry in the last 20 years, and I think it's now contracting. And part of I think in some ways that's a good thing, because we've got too used to the idea of wine as a alcohol delivery system, and what wine really should be is part of a well-balanced diet. And so. So I think in some ways, if the wine industry can go back to what it was 25, 30 years ago, where wine, and the way it is in Europe, where wine is really part of the diet and not an alcoholic beverage, not a cocktail, we'd be better served. And I think that's coming. And I will say that, yeah, a glass or two of wine for you a day may not be healthy for you, may not actually increase your longevity, but it's not going to be something that is going to be dangerous for you.
Yeah. Well, okay.
We'll come back to that. Next in the stack.
Yeah, fat, salt, sugar, everything in moderation. Anyway, my name's Carla Sabloff.
What Julia Child said to me when I asked her at her 80th birthday, what do you do with all this stuff? She said, moderation.
Yeah.
So Carla Sabloff Smith, I'm the class of 1977, also 1981 Culinary Institute of America graduate. So I have a different perspective on some of this. But what I want to do is really talking about John. I spent my first 2 years at Antioch as a music major, not because I was a talented musician, and I was in the Antioch Orchestra. If anybody remembers, we had an Antioch Orchestra one semester. But it was because I just wanted to take as many courses with John as possible. So I said, okay, I'm a music major, and I'll just take everything he teaches. But what I want to say about John, and you kind of hinted when you blurted out history before, is you're listening to a piece of music, and he's being carried away, and he said, you can't listen to this piece of music without thinking, when was it written? What was going on politically in the world? What was going on in the other arts? What poetry was being written? What art was being made at the same time that this music was being made? No piece of music, no piece of art can stand, alone without the whole context of everything else in the world, politics, history, etc. And whenever I think about my Antioch education, I always think what I learned was any opinion I had or thought, I had to think of it in the context of all the other arts, all the politics, history, etc. I really feel like that was my Antioch education. What John Ronsheim repeated again and again, nothing exists in isolation. You have to look at the whole world picture. And that to me is priceless. Yeah. So.
To Coco.
Thank you. I have a question that's maybe more of an open-ended reflection for anyone who feels compelled to pick it up. But, I'm struck by Catherine's question around, the possibility of, for instance, adopting the culinary program in this moment or some version of it. But also, David, your remark about the sort of, timeliness or specificity of the development of that idea in 78, around the sort of like emergence of the farm to table movement in the US and, farmers markets on the West Coast at least, et cetera. And I don't know, I guess I'm thinking that, so many of the ideas that have been presented of John's continue to feel deeply inspiring and, motivating. And also looking at our moment, how much more profoundly in so many ways we're alienated from our food system. The increasing global complexity and precarity of our food system due to climate crisis, et cetera. And also I think it's, worth acknowledging, not with any moral inflection, but just the Eurocentrism of, John's interest or of the culinary program. And so I am just wondering about reflections on, and to your point, Rick, about, good teachers sort of give you the tools to engage with the world, less, sort of impart information that you then just walk away with. But, I mean, what do you think about what we do with John's insights for this moment, I guess? And that's a huge question, but I'm really just looking for, whatever comes to mind.
I've got something to say about that. So, as winemakers, we're often trying to figure out, like, what kind of wine to make. Right, and my business partner Clark Smith and I put on for a number of years a symposium called the Postmodern Winemaking Symposium. Now we don't know modernism from post toasties, but I can tell you it was mostly for winemakers. But there's a crying need for aesthetics, a conversation about aesthetics. What's good? What's bad? Why is it good? Why is it bad? We were talking last night about drinking wine, and I said, for me, there are no bad wines, just like there are no bad children, because I look at all wines as kind of like my children, and I see them, they're misguided children and boring children and talented children, but they're all children, and there's a crying need, and I have been kind of formulating this, like the John Ronsheim symposium on food, wine, and aesthetics, because that was so central to his vision of things. And there's a crying need for people. People feel like, what it is with wine is it's like, well, tell me what Robert Parker scored it. It was in 89, it was in 92. That's the only tools that people have to kind of sort through for themselves. And one of the things that John taught me was that in the realm of your own senses, you are the regent. You are the king and queen of your own senses and your own sensibility. And then to be able to communicate that to another person is a very difficult thing. And in our culture, we've really let it go. And I think there's a crying need for it. And I think you could get some interest in that. To resurrect the whole culinary institute would be very difficult, I think, because that space has now been filled by large corporate wineries. If that culinary program had been able to brought to fruition, it probably would have secured the financial future of this college forever, but it would have changed the character of Antioch fundamentally. It would have made it a Eurocentric elite. It would have opened itself certainly to criticisms of being Eurocentric and elitist. So, no, it's true. It's true. So I think it would be, but I think this idea, there's
no way to prove that once the trip to France was set up in the first year of 1978, that 3 years later there wouldn't be a trip to Mumbai.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, multiculturalism took off in the 80s. It would definitely, well, we can't say, but in my view, it would have transformed into a global program, not a Eurocentric program.
Speculative futures.
Go ahead.
We do have an
I'm not saying what you're saying is not true.
Can I make a...
Yes, and we have an online question after this.
Okay, so I just want to address this, that I have the firm belief that you arrive at universalism through particularism. Mm-hmm. And so through an intense understanding of a particular culture, and John made no bones about being European and Eurocentric. It wasn't It wasn't like a secret. It wasn't something he was hiding from people. But he derived this idea about being able to perceive, and that is applicable to anything. And I think, knowing John, that he wouldn't have opposed other things, and he was very interested in Japanese cuisine, for instance. And interestingly, in Piedmont, which is where we had our reunion, the Piemontese have really embraced Japanese food, and it's based on the fact that there's a lot of raw ingredients, and the Piemontese eat raw meat, right, and with olive oil and pepper. But it's kind of a, if you think about, yeah, there's that particular case, but here's another one that's similar, and I think it would be easy to broaden it out.
Sorry, can I
We're
say
going to,
something?
yes, I'm going to set up the mic for a direct response here in the middle, and then so that you have the mic direct response. And then we do have an online question we want to get to, too. For the record, right in the middle, blue shirt, if you can pass it back or pass it down.
David should speak. I see my voice to David. David has something better to say.
And then we have one more online. And theoretically, our panel has concluded in terms of the clock, but since this nice storm cloud is overhead, I think it's okay to continue the conversation here. If anyone needs to leave to set up, it is 8 after 4. But a few of us can maintain this last bit of questioning before we go over to the wine tasting. So, David, response.
The only thing I would say is I think that the one criticism I ever heard John give of the whole proposal was it was too French. And I think it was too French, and I think that when I've been reflecting on this project and like what were the flaws, and I will confess that I found very few through my incredibly biased lens. I will also say that the thing that really stands out to me is John, who created this black music program, and I think had the vision for the way that things could be different, did not think who's really contributed tremendously to making American cuisine, right?
Yeah.
That's not in that proposal, and I think that that's a little bit of a betrayal of the idea. One other thing I would just say in terms of going forward and things just really quickly is that I think the main thing about John's to take away from that is the sheer ambition, the absolute not following, but the love of something. You're not going to make a new program and make a new start without commitment and just like absolute affection.
Yeah, yeah. Saul, how do we find the questioner that's online? Okay.
This is a message from Tom Booth from online. He said, "I'm so sad to not be among you, but I live in France and the distance made it not possible. David, Jeff, and Rick, your presentations were amazing. I would not have been able to do that without bursting into tears. I'm involved in food. I gave a presentation in a panel earlier today. To respond to an earlier question, please, all of us who are in food, let's make a group and see what we can do to bring all that John gave to us back to Antioch. I think that food can still do something amazing at Antioch, and students could really flourish."
Fantastic. I invite us to continue this conversation over our guided wine tasting, which is going to be in the Foundry Theater. The rain is overhead for about 15 more minutes. Do we have another comment? Yeah, it's okay. I can take 2 more. Those who need to go to set up can go. This will just be room discussion, and we'll see you in the wine tasting. Okay.
And we'll take more questions or comments.
Wait, yeah, it's a question for vintners. So,
Yeah.
because of my comment later, I want to clarify. So, I love wine, and I think vintners are brilliant and have an incredible talent. So, I'm gonna. The first question is basically, can the genius of thousands of years of vintnering be channeled well into a non-alcoholic wine beverage? What's the potential?
So my standard, I've been involved in lots of non-alcoholic wine projects, and my standard answer to that question is trying to make wine without alcohol is a little bit like trying to make a human being without blood. You can embalm somebody and prop them up in the corner,
Yeah,
and
okay.
from a distance, they look pretty good.
Okay.
But the closer you get, the more you go, something's off here.
Yeah,
It's just,
okay.
it's not possible. It's a different kind of beverage.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe there's something that could be done that way, but it's not wine.
Yeah.
But we also discussed the history of fermentation and how core to the human experience fermentation is, and so there's other things.
Right. I mean, there's fine kombucha, for instance. You know, there's all sorts of fine beverages, as in similar to fine wine, but they're not wine.
They're not
So
wine.
that's my question. Okay.
Did we have one? Yeah.
As far as the criticisms about possible Eurocentric, perspective on the entire development of a food program at Antioch, I just have to point out that in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, where this whole concept John had truly did take off, and I credit, Alice Waters as being John's equivalent of visionary. It became, and I think all of us understand this, they started with French techniques, but no one would identify the farm-to-table food we have across the country right now as French. I think everyone would call it uniquely American. And I think, in the South, where I grew up in Atlanta, maybe they were 10 years behind California, but when I would go back to Atlanta, I'd see they were sourcing from farms in Georgia. And I don't think you could pigeonhole and say that just because a program started with a certain perspective, it would stay with that perspective. I think it would become American food, and I think that's the way to envision it personally. So.
Yeah.
Just one final comment. This is a magazine called Gastronomica. I don't know how many of you saw, but there's an article in here it's called Imagining the American Institute of Food and Wine, and it's about John. This is my only copy. It has a picture of a very young Lawrence Fishburne on it holding the hindquarters of a slaughtered lamb, I believe. He was very poor in those days, and he was served to be the model for this photograph. And it's an interesting article. You can get the article online, but it also has some pictures of John and a facsimile of a letter, one of his famous letters that he would write people. It's my only copy. You're free to damage it, not to steal it, and that's it. So I'll have it at the website.
What's the date? Suzanne, isn't that the one that's been published on the reunion site? Yes.
It was fall of 2001. It's the same article, but if anybody wanted to look at the actual.
Thank you, everyone. We are in a lull between clouds. I invite you to make your way to the Foundry Theater. Thank you.